Hi everyone, my name is Matt and welcome to my channel. It's been a while since we painted some Tyranids. The first video series I made for the channel was for the Tyranid side of the Leviathan box. It's been over 2 years now, and I felt like it was time to update the color scheme and make some refinements. So let's paint some Termagants and Ripper Swarms for the army. We also have a set of recipe cards to go along with the video, and you can download them and print them out. Details about how to get them will be down in the description below. The first half of the video will be beginner friendly, and we'll cover the basics and paint the model to a battle-ready quality. In the second half, we'll spend a little more time and add some highlights. So let's grab our brushes and get started. The first thing I'd like to go over is my way of priming, which is different from some of my older videos. I start off with a solid coat of gray primer. This canned primer is from Ace Hardware stores in the US, and it has the smoothest finish out of everything I tested. If you don't have access to this primer, I would recommend testing out what you have locally and use the smoothest gray primer you can find. Then I attached each model to a cork with double-sided tape. These corks are from whiskey bottles, and I like the little plastic cap they have on one side. The Ripper Swarms will be too hard to paint while attached to the base, so I glued them temporarily to some scraps of sprue. Next I used my airbrush to spray white paint over the gray primer. I'm going to spray evenly all over the model, but you could spray it in a zenithal style too if you want. This is standard acrylic white paint, diluted with water. There are a few reasons I like to prime this way. I feel that a canned primer adheres to the model much better than acrylic airbrush primer. White canned primers tend to be very gritty, so instead I decided to use gray, and then sprayed white with my airbrush. The result is really smooth, and it's way better than any white primer out of a can. With the priming stage finished, next I painted a layer of skeleton horde over everything. When working with contrast paints, I like to paint one section at a time. Use plenty of paint so it flows into all the recesses. I like to use a stippling kind of motion to make sure I don't miss any spots. Then I'll use the brush to soak up any excess paint and wipe some paint off the raised edges to create a highlight. The paint will continue to flow and run a bit as it settles, so look for any areas you can smooth out before the paint dries. Contrast paints and the stippling kind of brush strokes will end up destroying your brushes, so I like to use older brushes whenever I can. This is an old number 2 brush with a blunt tip, and it isn't good for detail work anymore, but it's perfect for this kind of task. Next I painted the scales with a custom mix. This is about 3 parts Fleshtone's red and 1 part black Templar. If you're painting an army, I would recommend mixing up a whole pot of paint. That way you only have to mix it once. I decided to mix up this color for my Tyranids because I wanted something that looked good with just one layer in order to save time. Fleshtone's red on its own looked too bright and would need a shade or something else layered on top of it. I wanted a darker look for the scales, and adding a small amount of black Templar got the look I was aiming for. This is a pretty strong color and can easily stain the skin if you make a mistake, so I think it's a good idea to take your time and paint carefully. Use a good brush with a sharp point, and make sure to get right down in the crevice where the scale meets up against the skin. I want to add some color to the ends of the limbs and the tail, and Magos purple is a great color for this kind of thing. I'm going to blend out the edge of the wet paint, and here's a trick that might help you get smoother results. We're going to wet the area first, but the key is to make sure the brush has very little water on it. Dip it in the water pot, and then wipe it on a paper towel. The brush should be barely damp, and that's it. Brush it on the area where the blend is going to be, and then grab some paint, apply it to the lower part of the limb, rinse the brush, wipe it off on a paper towel, and use the clean brush to blend the edge of the paint. You don't need to wet the area first if you're quick enough, but if the paint starts drying before you can blend it, it will leave tide marks and coffee staining. I decided to add a second layer of Magos purple for a deeper color, and I blended it the same way as before. Apply some paint, rinse the brush, wipe it on a paper towel, and use the clean brush to blend out the edge. Next I painted the weapon and tongue with Cadian Fleshtone. After the first layer dried, I painted a second for a solid finish. I shaded those areas next with Magos Purple. If you want a more vibrant pink color, you could use Volupus Pink instead. Next, I painted the vents and eyes with Toxic Yellow. After the first layer dries, you may want to paint a second for an opaque finish. On details this small, I usually find that I can get away with just one layer. Then I shaded the yellow with Gryph-Hound Orange. Finally, I painted the claws and teeth with Black Legion. This is a little different from my other Tyranid videos. Those recipes involved mixing a couple colors, and I wanted to simplify the process as much as possible. At this stage, you could base the models and call them finished. But I'd like to add some highlights, so let's keep going. Let's highlight the skin first, starting with a glaze of Bonewhite. Depending on how light your base coat dried, you may need to add a small amount of Offwhite to match the existing color on the model. Dilute the paint with 2 or 3 parts water, and with barely any paint on the brush, build up a few layers on the smooth areas and raised edges. The paint shouldn't run or flow off the brush, and it should stay exactly where you put it. If it runs or flows, it means your brush has too much paint on it. Build up as many layers as you like until you're happy with the results. I also used some less diluted paint to touch up a couple mistakes where the dark red spilled over onto the skin. I highlighted the pink areas on the feet and tail with a sharp Bonewhite glaze, rather than mixing a pink color. This is just like the glaze I painted earlier, except it's a very sharp line on the edges. Since the paint is diluted with water, it results in a semi-transparent layer, and it looks pink because the colors underneath show through slightly. I highlighted the skin one more time with Offwhite on the sharpest edges and corners. This kind of highlight can be time consuming, and I wouldn't paint it on a whole army. It's also not very noticeable from a distance, and when it comes to army painting, I think it's better to focus my time on the things that make the biggest impact. Speaking of the biggest impact, I think the scales are really what make Tyranids stand out. Time is a resource just like paint and brushes, and it's worth thinking about how you want to spend it. I like spending more time painting the scales if I can, even if it means simplifying other areas. I think they have the best value when it comes to time invested versus visual impact. I like to follow along the outer edges and any sculpted grooves and cracks. I'll also add a few extra grooves here and there too. On larger models and centerpieces, I like to add a soft glaze highlight before painting the edges, but I won't do any glazing on these models since there are so many of them. Check out my Death Leaper video here if you'd like to see that process. Now is a great time for me to ask you to do those YouTube things that we all love so much. If you're liking the video so far, please give it a like, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on any future content. If you really like what I'm doing here and want to support the channel further, please consider Patreon or a YouTube channel membership. We have some perks including a Discord server, printer-friendly PDF files of our new recipe cards, and early access to videos. Let's pretend we made a mistake here and need to fix it. A mix of corn red and a small amount of black paint is a pretty close match to the base color. The exact ratio of red to black will vary depending on how dark your contrast base coat dried. I highlighted the scales one more time with Fire Dragon Orange. This is a fairly weak color, and you may need to paint a second layer if you want a brighter result. Next, I highlighted the edges of the claws and teeth with a sharp line of Thunderhawk blue. I highlighted the claws one more time with Russ Gray, focusing on the sharpest edges and corners. Next, I highlighted the weapon and tongue with a light pink. I used a mix of mostly Emperor's Children pink plus a small amount of white. The exact ratio will vary depending on how dark your shade dried. I highlighted the vents and eyes next with Toxic Yellow, leaving a narrow orange outline. And finally, I added a tiny dot of black in the eyes. I clipped the Ripper Swarms off the support sprue, and then attached them to the base with super glue. Sometimes the fit can be kind of tight, so I like to carve away some plastic from the socket with a hobby knife. I used an old brush to apply a generous layer of wood glue to the top of the base, and then I sprinkled on some coarse gravel and fine sand. After the glue dried, I painted the base with thinned Rhinox hide, followed by a heavy dry brush of Mournfang brown, a lighter dry brush of Balor brown, and a very light dry brush of Bonewhite. I painted the rocks with Dawnstone, and then shaded them with a mix of Agrax Earthshade and Nuln Oil. I painted the edge of the base with Mournfang brown, and after that dried, I added patches of static grass with super glue. I'd like to give a big shout out to our supporters here on YouTube and Patreon. Thank you so much for your support. It really is a huge help. If you want to be like these amazing people and help support what I'm doing here, just click the join button down below or follow the Patreon link in the video description. Thank you. The past couple years on the channel have really flown by. The channel began with Tyranids, and after going back to watch the old videos, I can really see how much things have progressed around here. I want to keep learning, improving, and pushing myself to make the best content I can. One of my goals for the new year is to make YouTube my full-time job. It's going to be a lot of work to get there, but I know I'm up to the challenge, and I can't do that without all of you watching at home. If you're new to the channel, or if you've been here from the very beginning, thank you for watching, subscribing, and helping spread the word. Well, that's it for now, and until next time, happy painting.